We are going to do a hip replacement for you. We are going to fix your broken knee. Oh no, but for fertility, no, sorry. You just get one shot.
But you're like, oh, by the way, you get 2 weeks. It's not at full pay, 150 quid a week. And also, fuck off back to work. Thank you very much. Like, but can I not parent?
Yeah. We are currently sending people to a GP surgery that have been trying for 1 to 2 years. They're talking to their GP and the GP is saying, okay, let's look at this. Let's do these tests. They come back and then they're just automatically sent to obs and gynae clinics. So that's completely female focused.
It's very, very true and very, very sad at the moment that good causes and things that are not overtly about generating a profit get ignored.
Yeah, it's really sad. And actually they're massive issues that we all need to be focusing on. I mean, just when I just look at the lane that I'm in at the moment, and I know we'll talk about it, but there is so much to cover just in fertility. And actually, when you start looking outside of that and the issues that are going on, even in like maternity care or like male paternity leave, and there's, as soon as you start going over that bridge and going down those paths, you find, oh my goodness, there's so much we need to be talking about.
I could rant about paternity leave for a very long time. And people's attitude to fathers, like people's attitudes to mothers, new mothers, and is just bad enough. But you're like, oh, by the way, you get 2 weeks. It's not at full pay, 150 quid a week, and also fuck off back to work. Thank you very much. You're like, but can I not parent?
Yeah.
Can I do some of that, please?
It's terrible. And I think the ramifications socially in our kind of setup now in society are immense. And I just don't think enough of the decision makers are zooming out before they start planning. There's just not enough of a zoom out. There's no kind of strategic business approach to these things. And
I agree.
It's concerning, isn't it?
I also think that part of the problem is that a lot of the decision makers are in the privileged camp. They've not had to worry about working 2 jobs to pay for nursery bills. They've not had to worry about whether or not you've got a freelance career that you can get back into, whether or not there's a state where the work that you do can be done remotely, and if the companies you work for support it or not. Whether there's this whole, the gender divide alone is one thing, but particularly for men, whether there's that sense of, well, you're a dad now and you've got some other responsibilities, and they are these things, and we get it. I think a lot of people who make the decisions don't realize how hard it can actually be and the impact that some really, really small changes can make, which, I'd quite like to see. I would, if I had a political platform, I would be actively campaigning for full-time free nursery care. As one of my things.
Start one, Dominic. I did. Just give it a go.
Yeah, I can add that to the production company, the YouTube channel, the being dad, and the full-time job.
Do you know, I've noticed that they all kind of help each other. Like I'm not recommending that you go to burnout, but I do think if you're really passionate about a topic, sounds like you are, go for it.
I agree. I'm more likely to try and find something to do in politics than I am to start a charity.
Great.
Because I get so cross. But that's never going to happen. I'm not the kind of person that people vote for. That's not the thing. I'm the sort of person that tells people how to do it.
We are always recruiting, and we've got the Check Him Too campaign going on at the moment that is kind of linked to some of that stuff. And the more numbers, the better. So if you want to
tell me about it. What's the Check Him Too campaign?
So we started the Check Him Too campaign about a month ago now, because part of our fertility access campaign in Parliament is it's a balanced approach. So we're not just saying, hey, government, NHS, give us a load of money and throw it at a load of people that need IVF treatments, which I think is the perception that a lot of people think to start with. But actually, we're saying we don't want you to just fund a load of treatment that isn't going to work, potentially. We want to do the zoom out approach and actually look at the men in the equation, because we know that they're 50% of the issue sometimes, or the diagnosis. And actually at the moment, we're not testing men hardly at all. Hardly any urology referrals are happening. We wanted, with the Check Him Too campaign, to just get people talking about male fertility. So we started it to encourage people to write into the men's health strategy submission. We then put in our submission for the men's health strategy, which was on the 16th. Was it 16th? 17th was the deadline for that. And then now we're just waiting to hear if it will be included, because there were some brilliant things included in it and lots of considerations. But it's kind of a massive one, I feel, that we know that male fertility is a biomarker for future health conditions in men. We know that by not diagnosing men, it's potentially contributing to a big outlay of NHS funding spend that might be avoidable potentially. But it's also telling us that these men, if we get them in and get them talking about semen analysis and actually make it not an embarrassing thing, but a standard thing, like a woman has a smear test in their maybe early 20s, we can see if there's markers that are indicating cardiovascular disease in the future, diabetes, cancer. And also, obviously, if they're going to have fertility issues in the future, and if they can adjust maybe some of their current lifestyle factors to think about that in their 20s before it becomes a problem.
That's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting. That's very interesting. I had no idea that by doing that analysis at the same time as doing fertility analysis, you could detect things like cancer or diabetes and have a look at preventative care, which frankly is where the NHS needs to move to anyway. Prevention is becoming more important than cure. But I think there's a sense with men, particularly over the last forever, that it's heads down, carry on, go to work, earn money, do things, and not be willfully ignorant. Almost about the way things are. This is not the subject that I thought I was going to start talking about, but it's interesting. I like it. Because I like to think I'm relatively open and relatively aware of some of the things that go on, but even I hate talking about some of it and going to the doctors. And speaking to you and speaking to Alice is a really interesting eye-opener and challenge for me as a person, let alone informative to anyone else. But how can you encourage men to start going for semen analysis? How is that a thing that...
I think shame is always dissolved when something's spoken about. And just literally by us having this conversation and more men talking about it, we've already started to etch in on that with male mental health. We've seen a shift in that over the last few years, not nearly enough, but it's starting to happen. But I think having conversations at school level about your testicles, like if you have a lump on your testicles, that's called a varicocele, potentially. Could be a number of things, but could be a varicocele. I'm not a medical professional. This is from the people that I work with. But again, if you have a varicocele, which a large number of men do have, that will heat your sperm, and your sperm won't be able to swim successfully to reproduce. That's just one of many, many things that we need to be aware of in our teenage years, and particularly for young men. But I think if we're talking about testicles, if we're talking about sperm, if we're talking about semen analysis, it's important that we know about this. The same with women. We need to be talking about our vaginas. We need to be talking about our reproductive system and actually what the difference between a vagina and a vulva is. Because if you said to most women, I think nowadays, do you know what your anatomy looks like down there? And do you know which bit's which? I don't think that many people would be able to correctly label those parts. And it's so important. And it shouldn't be embarrassing because it's a big part of our lives. But it's embarrassing because we hide it. And I think, as with anything, we strike up a conversation, we get talking about it, it becomes less embarrassing.
Yeah, I think I had a chat with the managing director of a post-production company during one of the first recordings of one of these episodes. And it was talking about the gender divide in post-production and in the workforce generally. And she was talking about how education is the answer to it all. Right from the beginning, right from early years, we need to be talking about it. We need to open it up. We need to give people the framework of language to have these conversations. One of the big problems that men quite often have, I think, is when we go and hang out with our friends, we don't tend to talk about sexual health or health generally. Occasionally it might be, I'm going to start running, I think I'm a bit fat. But that's kind of as far as it goes. I've got a good friend who I talk to fairly regularly, and we're quite open with each other, which is quite nice. But it's rare. And I wonder if we're a generation away from that being opened up a little bit and having the more open conversations, I think, on both sides.
Yeah, I do think it's starting to happen, and we're seeing it actually in our charity support groups, where we mostly have predominantly women are coming to our support groups, and they're saying, well, you know, my partner, he doesn't seem to want to talk about it. He doesn't have anywhere to go. And we've actually partnered with an organisation called Test Him, who are brilliant, and they provide a space for men to just go and chat. But for some guys, like my husband, he didn't want to go and talk about our fertility. The last thing he wanted to do was talk about his sperm while he's having a pint with his mates. But actually, the more that he became aware of knowing about it, I think the more supportive he's become in actually igniting that into a conversation. Like we were at a barbecue last night, and the guy that we were sitting with was in his 20s. He's a cyclist, and they're potentially at the stage where they're looking to conceive. And we couldn't help but say, well, be aware that as a cyclist, like that could affect your fertility. And he was like, no way. Like, why is that? And I think this is the thing. We just need to be injecting a few bits into conversation and getting the interest there so that people look. And actually, you can have a semen analysis quite simply nowadays. It is available. You can go and have one done. And actually, that could be giving you so much information to your future health. And I think if we can get the government interested into this, which is why we've spoken to Wes Streeting, which is why we did the submission for the men's health strategy and why we do MP drop-ins, because we just want them talking about it, because we want people to have IVF that need it and be able to have the funding to support that. But we also don't want to be unnecessarily referring people that potentially have preventable health conditions or something that they can work on through lifestyle factors, when we could help them, you know, just by getting it out there and having a chat, or maybe having a basic test.
This is one of the things that I'm finding quite interesting about the conversations I'm having at the moment around fertility. And there have only been a couple of them, I'll freely admit. But there's the sense that fertility and IVF treatment it's a medical procedure. It's not an elective thing to go through. And it can obviously detect more, like semen analysis can detect more medical conditions than it might otherwise. It's all wrapped up in the case of general medical care. How responsive was Streeting to the subject?
He was great. He was very interested. We immediately connected through his secretary, and he encouraged our response to the submission. He listened. He was concerned. Obviously, I think you couldn't be the health secretary and not be concerned about a 50% decline in male fertility in 50 years. That's something you're going to have to pay attention to. And I think we also need to be looking outside of just testing once the problem's occurred. We need to be looking at lifestyle factors. We need to be looking at endocrine disruptors, the chemicals that we're using, the exposures that we're having. I mean, some people talk about mobile phones being in pockets, but I think there's more serious, obviously that can have a concern because you might be heating up your testicles, but there's more serious concerns than that. We're looking at potentially having microplastics in our food from microwaving something in a plastic dish in the microwave before you eat it. And I think understanding that using chemicals all around us, even things like perfumes to some degree, people are concerned about. Just having that awareness and being able to make choices about your lifestyle and for your children. Like, I've got children, luckily. My fertility treatment was successful. I have now got children, and I'm worried about them and their future fertility and what that looks like. So by having those chats and making some basic changes in your lifestyle, you could potentially have a really good impact on your future fertility. And it's not being talked about enough.
Yeah, I agree. And 50% drop in male fertility
50% in 50 years.
In 50 years. In the next 50
Within
years.
Within 50 years. No, there has been already.
There has been already. And 1 in 6 people, I think your website says, experience some kind of infertility issues. That's a
1 in 6 people
amount.
are navigating it. Yeah, a huge amount of people. And actually, when you look at the cost of fertility treatments, Carol Gilling, who's one of our trustees and is the CEO of the Agora Clinic in Brighton, she was saying, you know, when we're looking at the cost of treatment being something like £7,000 average, and that's not including when you have additional things for like surrogacy, for example, can increase costs, or for same-sex couples or donation. But that's a hell of a lot of money. £7,000 for your average person. That's huge. And actually, for them, it's not a choice. They're desperate to become parents, and it's a medical need. And I think if we're saying, no, sorry, we are going to do a hip replacement for you, we are going to fix your broken knee, you know, we are going to give you treatment for this, that, or the other. Oh, no, but for fertility, no, sorry, you just get one shot. I just think it's ludicrous. And one of the things that bothers me is that you tend to get a reaction of, well, it's so expensive, why should the NHS be funding that? But actually, it's not that expensive. It's the only treatment that we're aware of the cost. If you were actually to look at the cost of all the different treatments, it is costly, but it's not the most costly treatment that we have on the NHS. It's the only one we know about.
Yeah, I've been racking my brains about this since I spoke to Alice, because a lot of the argument from people that generally that I would speak to would say, okay, well, you can't have a baby by quote unquote natural means. Why don't you just adopt? And I can see where the argument comes from. However, the more I thought about what Alice and I spoke about, the more I tried to find a medical comparison and think about the idea that IVF is not an elective procedure. It should just be a medical thing. It's not self-inflicted. It's not something people choose to experience. And then I couldn't help but go down maybe an unfair mental rabbit hole about things like type 2 diabetes and smoking-related cancers, which we do treat on the NHS, which we do provide support and healthcare for, and are entirely down to personal lifestyle choice. So there already is not necessarily precedent and not necessarily a direct comparison, but we're already treating what are obviously medical conditions that are self-inflicted. IVF is not, infertility is not a self-inflicted thing. So the fact that we don't think about it the same way is almost a PR crisis, because it's not been communicated. It's been thought of as this optional extra, when in fact it should be one of the first things that we can think about. Now, I do love a little bit of a rant, but does it sound fair?
I think it's a really difficult one, because the fertility process can be so bespoke that so many people have that you're not just given an infertility diagnosis. A number of people have unexplained or unexplored infertility, but then for some people they don't have a fallopian tube because of an ectopic pregnancy, or for some people they have the MTHFR gene mutation where that might be a different supplement needed. I don't know if you've heard of MRKH, which is where the woman, in fact, I shouldn't really be talking about it because I'm no expert on that, but it's your body is actually born differently internally. So you're not able to have a baby because you don't have a womb, which is why they've recently done the first womb transplant, which you probably heard about in the news.
Yeah, it's incredible.
So I think, sorry, I'm kind of digressing here, but I think what I'm saying is it's so bespoke. It's not kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. It doesn't work like that. And with any other medical condition or diagnosis, you wouldn't just give a drug and say, okay, this is how we fix it. And I think historically, what we've done is we've found out that IVF works. It's then provided a miracle for a number of people. And then we've kind of used it to fix all the infertility diagnosis, when actually we need to be looking at each individual case, in my opinion, and looking at how we can do preliminary testing before we're putting people through these very invasive, really emotional procedures that actually often as women, we go through loss as well. And that's something that for the man and the woman, or, you know, in a same-sex couple, it can be exactly the same. It's incredibly traumatic. And I think there isn't enough understanding of that either. And I think one of the things that has been shown in research now is with DNA fragmentation testing of semen analysis, there is a proven connection now in research with recurrent loss of babies if you have a 2-strand DNA fragmentation test. So I think the research is starting to progress, but there's not enough funding in the research. And as this has been kind of a less prioritized area of medicine, I think it's just been kind of shunted into the corner, as you said, as an elective procedure. And actually, this is really important. We're in a country and globally, where we have a declining fertility rate. And our fertility rate is continuing to go down. And I'm not saying that fertility treatments is going to fix that, but I am saying that by not even looking at this, we're not going to be able to contribute positively with the fertility rate within the UK. I think the conversation is much bigger than that. I think we should, as we discussed earlier, we should be looking at childcare arrangements. We should be looking at affordability of childcare, parenting, maternity, paternity leave. But I think actually the reality is society is progressing as well. Some people are rightly or wrongly choosing not to have children. That's their choice. And I think we're not that supportive as a society, particularly of women that say, actually, I'm not going to have any children. They are continually questioned or made to feel ashamed or made to feel uncomfortable. And again, that's another whole pathway that we need to be really looking at and saying, okay, well, that's your choice. If you don't want to have kids, absolutely fine. But what's really sad is there's a number of people who really do want to have children and they want to become parents desperately, and we're not supporting them as a country. It's not there. So we see a number of people that have just got to a point where emotionally and financially they're saying, no, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. There is no one to help me. So I'm just going to end up not having children. And I think that's terribly sad.
There's also a real risk, not wanting to be dystopian and terrifying about it. But if fertility rates drop that much and there's some of it's medical, some of it's an element of choice, there's a real risk that we end up in a children of men scenario where we're not having kids. And we as a species start to slow down. And we've seen the problems that an aging population can place on a younger population. There are more people now claiming state pension than there used to be, and it has a knock-on effect. And the fewer children there are to bring in new income at the lower levels of career development, then that's also going to be part of the problem. I suppose, to look at fertility, you have to have a lot of different points of view. You have to have a really long-term point of view. You have to have a medical point of view. You have to have a mental health and an emotional point of view, a financial one for not just the cost of doing fertility treatment, but for parenthood and funding kids when it works. It's much more intricate than I had first thought when I spoke to Alice only a couple of weeks ago. There's a whole web of culture and medical goings on, I suppose, in just one section of our lives.
Yeah, it's huge. It's a huge web. And I think it's just been kind of following a fairly continual path that's just been the same for a very long time. And I think with Fertility Action and with as our charity and with the Fertility Access campaign, what we're trying to do is bring everyone back a little bit and actually look at the bigger picture and see how we can work on preventative measures through education, through testing, but also question where we think it might not be working. For example, the integrated care boards are continually reducing the funding for access to fertility treatments. Sussex changed their funding very recently. Cheshire and Merseyside have just come to the end of their first consultation for reducing funding. Greater Manchester, that ends tomorrow. I think they're all starting to wind down their offering just at a time when it really needs to be ramped up. And actually, there's so many details here. The clinics, the people that are providing the services, private clinics, they profit, of course, from lots of people needing this treatment. So we need to really be looking at, where is the patient focus here? What does the patient journey look like? How can we make sure GPs actually have the resources and understanding to be doing good referrals? The GPs that we surveyed at the Royal College of GPs, we came back with the result, 80.6 of them that were surveyed had no education on male fertility. So we are currently sending people to a GP surgery that have been trying for 1 to 2 years. They're talking to their GP and the GP is saying, okay, let's look at this, let's do these tests. They come back and then they're just automatically sent to obs and gynae clinics. So that's completely female focused. And it doesn't make any sense because the men just aren't being looked at. And it's so important that we're looking at both.
Yeah, it takes two to tango. There's a much bigger picture that needs to be looked at, like you say. And I'm in fairness to the doctors, it's not even their fault that they don't have that knowledge. They need that training, that communication needs to happen. And people talking is the start of how to fix things.
And I think as well, giving the doctors basic resources, because I think it's unfair of us to expect GPs to be experts on absolutely every topic. It's not possible. So it's about helping them and aiding them and making the process easier for them rather than throwing stones in their direction, which I always bang on about this, but I know a few GPs and they've come into this job because they care about people. They want them to have a better process and they want to be able to help them. That's why they're doing the job. But it's difficult for them because your brain can only take so much information. And this is, as we've just in this discussion now, it's a complex issue. And I think to be able to educate GPs fully on this is kind of impossible. But what we want to do is give them basic kind of bullet points that they can refer to as a resource, and then help them with referral pathways and kind of suggestions to maybe urology if it's needed for a male specialist. And then the obs and gynae referrals can maybe happen after those tests have taken place. So I think, sadly, at the moment, we don't have a lot of data on male fertility. And I think that's the way forward really as well. We need to be looking at gathering data on semen analysis, looking at what those parameters are, looking at the biomarkers and actually what that looks like in the future of men's health. But the starting point really is hopefully the men's health strategy gives us a yes, let's put male fertility in there. And that's the first step forward, really.